So my name's Bill Little. I'm with an innovation investment company called Orchestra BioMed, and we have a unique business model wherein we look to help companies bridge that really challenging period between early proof of concept, say post-EFS study where we have some promising data, and we're staring down a 300 or 400 patient RCT that's going to cost us $40 million, and we're burning $1.5 million a month for the next 4 years. And so, we've talked to numerous companies over the last year that all need somewhere between $75 and $125 million to get to that FDA approval. And at Orchestra BioMed, we work to try to bridge that gap by providing some expertise and capability and capital. In fact, I'm joined here by Dave Allen from Medtronic. Medtronic's our largest shareholder. We have an ongoing IDE study in collaboration with Medtronic with a pacemaker algorithm that acutely and sustainably reduces systolic blood pressure. And so we're here as an organization to kind of share what we do, but I think the stars of the show are the folks that are joining me here up on the panel, and the fact that we've got really 4 titans of the medical device industry between Intuitive and Dexcom and Boston Scientific and Medtronic. I'm really humbled to be on the stage with these folks, and I'm going to ask each one to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what we do before we get into the discussion. Murielle, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Bill. So Murielle McLane, I oversee Intuitive Ventures. So we are a $250 million asset under management fund, strategic, really an ecosystem play to help company expand in the world of minimal invasive care. We invest in early stage, seed to Series B is our sweet spot.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Steve Pacelli with Dexcom Ventures. I started Dexcom Ventures a little over 4 years ago, and I was blessed with Intuitive putting out a press release about 3 months prior to us founding Dexcom Ventures. So I literally just had to change the name and put the $100 million fund that the board approved for us. We've been doing it, again, investing in earlier stage technologies. Dexcom, as many of you know, is a very large one-trick pony doing continuous glucose monitoring. We're not limited to investing in diabetes-related technologies, but I'm reminded constantly by our board that our investments need to somehow tie back to the mothership, to the corporate parent.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Ryan, Boston Scientific. I've been with BSC for coming up on 18 years, most of that time doing business development. And we're one of the most active acquirers in the medtech industry. We tend to do a good handful of acquisitions every year. I lead the BD teams for the med-surg divisions. That's our endoscopy, urology, and neuromodulation divisions. And then we're also one of the most active venture investors. We deploy generally somewhere north of $100 million a year into venture investments in the medtech sector. And I lead the venture team for the corporation as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Allen. Been at Medtronic about 10 years. I lead business development and strategy for our medical surgical portfolio. So similarly, our endoscopy business, our surgical business, surgical robotics, as well as our acute care and monitoring business. We have about $1 billion minority investment portfolio as a company, obviously focused solely on medtech. And then within that billion, I'd say about $250 million of it would be direct VC investing in companies such as yourselves. And we're quite active in the space, bringing usually 5 to 10 investment recommendations a year historically. Obviously, last year has been a little bit different. So happy to get in the discussion here. Glad to see it looks like a pretty full house. So happy to get in the conversation.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm gonna start with you, Dave, with the first question, and maybe give a little bit of wind up personally. I about a year ago at this meeting, I was sitting in the audience and I was raising money. I was part of a little startup called Neovasc that we sold right around this time to Shockwave Medical. And during the 3 years that I was there, one of the things that was most difficult for me, and we had a clear sell the company goal. That was absolutely what we were trying to do. But for me, one of the biggest challenges was trying to figure out how these big strategics worked. And fundamentally, how do you navigate through the system between BD and having a divisional champion inside and the strategic team and the venture folks. And I think there's nobody maybe more complex than the team at Medtronic. And so, Dave, how should the folks in the audience here navigate a simple organization like Medtronic?
Yeah, super simple organization, highly matrixed, global. I think meetings like this help, and then getting connected to the right folks within your area of expertise is probably the most important. You spoke a little bit briefly about just finding a kind of champion within the company is probably the most important. Finding that advocate who can kind of navigate the approval process we have to go through to make these types of investments is what you really need to find. And so that can be one of our operating unit presidents almost always, as well as senior BD&S leaders like myself and others that are here at the conference. Those are probably your two most important touch points. And finding those kind of real champions of the technology that can communicate it internally and help kind of drive the strategy and drive the business plan and the model and the presentations is likely the most important. Kind of just disparately going through the org is usually would probably leave you frustrated. So, connecting with people like me, much of my job is to find the right person for your technologies within the organization to get a fair assessment. So that's where I really spend most of my time it's my job to understand our company and our matrix and then connect you to the right people within the organization to represent your business.
Steve, this one's for you. So on your team, if you think about the VC folks and the strategy folks and the business development folks and the business unit commercial leads, if those are the four pillars, and I'm not saying they are, but first of all, I guess, are those the four pillars? And what type of support would the folks in the audience need from those various pillars to get a deal done in your shop? How does that work? And do you need them all? Do you need one? Can you just walk through how you can make it happen?
No, it's a great question. I would tell you the closer an investment would be to the core business, meaning diabetes or insulin delivery, I probably need more support from the core business as opposed to some of the things we're looking at. We're typically investing in earlier stage technologies. Our typical check size is going to be somewhere between 3 to 5 million in any given round. So you get to a Series C round, we're not going to move the needle because you're probably looking at raising growth capital at that point. So our sweet spot is really that Series Seed, Series A, Series B follow-on. And we reserve dry powder in any of these deals. I've gotten myself a little over my skis a few times with the core business where, we're reminded again, we're strategic investors first, financial investors second. And when we invest in a company or when we pitch a company, oftentimes we're pitching a company to participate in a deal, we get a little ahead of ourselves in promising clinical support, regulatory support, quality system support. Not that Dexcom in and of itself is going to do those things for the portfolio company, but we do like to be able to bring in resources to help as a strategic, as, hey, let us help you not make the mistakes that we've made over the last, I'm pushing 20 years at Dexcom. So let us help you, let me get you to the right people. But again, the closer it gets to the core, the more support I would need really from the corporate development group as opposed to some of the earlier true technology development where we have a little more flexibility and freedom.
Right. And Murielle, how about at Intuitive? You guys have obviously been wildly successful and pioneered a space, and a big chunk of this meeting happens because of what you guys have pioneered, right? And if you were in the last session, you saw that. Can you walk us through your process with particular emphasis on how successful you guys have been about creating categories? The types of bets you have made have been category creators, and maybe through that lens, because I think a lot of the folks that we look at Orchestra are looking at creating entirely new ways of doing things, and there's been arguably no company more successful than Intuitive in doing that. So with that wind up, let's hear the magic, Murielle.
Yeah, of course I have the magic recipe. For him and anybody afterwards, come to me. No, but kidding aside, so we have been a category, innovator, and that's why now with the fund we're looking at supporting companies that want to aspire to be category leaders. And like Steve, we're really looking at ecosystem play, and I would say the closer it is to the core, the more corporate development it is going to be, to the point where we're not going to be involved. Now, as we're looking at the ecosystem play, we'll be an early investors, and as a strategic, that's where we're trying to bring to bear all of that expertise and that knowledge for our portfolio companies, being in the automation, in imaging, in big data, in hardware, in software, regulatory, quality, right? So there's a lot that we can contribute to the table, and I would say our goal is really to foster innovation through the process. So now, unlike other people, I would say that we do not need a business unit sponsor. Actually, my investment committee is really composed of our CEO, a board member, and then some of our key leaders, so chief strategy officer, chief product officer. So we're really looking at the ecosystem 10, 15 years out and seeing how we can make it successful more globally.
Yeah, that's great. Mike, when I was 24 years old, I went to work for Boston Scientific, and I used to show up at the Natick office when there was a Natick office every day in a blue blazer and a white shirt, because that's how you showed up at Boston Scientific in 1994. How does decision making work now at Boston Scientific 30 years later, that you guys have obviously become, arguably one of the most successful companies in the space, and certainly one of the top performing companies in the space? I think a lot of us are envious of the performance of your stock price and just the reputation that you guys have built. And so maybe you could talk a little about decision making in what's become, this phenomenal organization that's well respected and yet very complex.
Thank you for the compliment and the question. Decision making at Boston is pretty simple. So I think I have a little bit of a different answer to some of the questions that came before versus some of the other panelists. There's 40,000 people at Boston Scientific, but if you're trying to engage with Boston on a venture investment or an acquisition, there's maybe more like 20 people that you need to worry about. So we get together with our CEO and CFO and general counsel every few weeks for literally hours at a time, and go through the business cases of all the investments and acquisitions and other deals that we want to do. So it's a tight-knit group of people who are proposing business cases to a small group of decision makers very frequently, and we're in constant communication, very tightly aligned. So on the venture side, we've got 3 full-time folks on the team doing venture, and then within each of our 6 major business units, we've got 2 business development people who are just focused on that sector. So that right there is 15 folks. And whether you're early or late, or whether you're really close to our core or a little further out in an adjacency, it's the same group of people at Boston Scientific that are going to work through whether or not something is a great opportunity for us. So every venture investment winds up being sort of co-sponsored, and the business case is co-written by someone from venture and someone from the business unit BD team. They both have to love it. And the division president of that division needs to also love it. And if those 3 things are true, we have a constructive conversation with our decision-making body, and we can move really quickly. So that's the gist of decision-making.
Dave, at Medtronic, is it mandatory to have a business unit lead, sort of co-sponsor like Michael just outlined for Boston?
Yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say it's mandatory, but it's highly preferred. I mean, we have 16 operating units across and all focused on medtech. So the odds that the opportunity doesn't fit within one of those is exceedingly low. So similarly, if you don't have that, president who, really truly owns the business, communicating their need for that technology and why, we can't build it ourselves and why this is the right opportunity, it does, create more questions than typical. So I'd say that's ideal, but it's not absolutely mandatory.
And so I'll ask maybe this to each of the panelists. Is it the divisional president? First of all, if you just quick show of hands, it sounds like for the Medtronic and Boston folks, you pretty much need
We only have one
support.
division.
Right.
We do one thing.
So for the other 2 folks, is it essentially mandatory to have divisional business unit support to do a deal?
No.
No.
No, I mean, like I said, for us, it's the closer it is to the core, the more I would want someone in either corp dev or commercial or otherwise kind of pushing it. as opposed to some of the earlier stage technology investments that we kind of do on our own.
And for the guys on the end, Dave, you mentioned a divisional president. I mean, my experience has been a lot of times that divisional president is often influenced by somebody that's either a deep technical expert or a commercial leader. Can you talk about who the influencers are, and if you're sitting in this audience trying to figure out how do I get Medtronic or Boston or Dexcom or Intuitive to pull the trigger, can you give maybe some advice around who can influence that president? I don't think there's any divisional presidents that are at this meeting, right? And they're typically hard to get to, but we can get to deeper people in the organizations through meetings and whatnot. Maybe if you could just comment about how to make that influencing happen.
Sure. So here at this meeting, there are 4 of us from Boston. It's the whole venture team, and you can come find any one of us. We'll get you to the right one of us who speaks for venture. And like I said, we'll be closely connected to those division presidents and divisional BD leaders. I think every division president is surrounded by a management board. I think that's true at Medtronic as well. You can go find any of those people. You're going to be funneled right back to the business development team. We're really the ones, BD and VC, who are on point for helping the division presidents to decide what they're going to champion in front of the CEO.
Yeah, echoing, and I would say business development strategy first, and then internally we look very quickly and closely technically. So we'll find our technical SMEs that can kind of communicate your technology internally and understand it. So to me, when we do initial first assessment, it's going to be your business development strategy team, and then your technical scientists, depending on what the opportunity is and what we're looking at, would be certainly the core 3 or 4, and then quickly we move into commercial opportunities. You start thinking about our marketing teams or our key sales leaders. And usually once you get those kind of 3 core folks together, you can get a pretty good idea of what the opportunity is, what risks remain, and what the final runway is. Depending on the opportunity, obviously, in some cases, you'll be bringing your clinical team much sooner as well, just depending on where you are from a development perspective.
Murielle, at Intuitive, if you had to stack up the technical folks, the clinical folks, and the commercial folks, to summarize, I think, what Dave said, how would you prioritize influence for your team amongst those functions, or are there other functions that you look at to help guide your decisions?
So I'll start by saying, first, you usually start with the venture team, and wherever you go in the organization, you will be pointed back to the venture team. Yeah. So that's where it starts. And if we believe that this is something that we're interested in because it is in a big enough market and there's a big enough clinical need, we'll start with technical and product before going down to, is it the right team to execute? And I want to emphasize that piece as well. And then from there, we'll go into clinical, regulatory, reimbursement. Given where we invest, commercial is probably the area that we look last in our process, frankly. So,
this one's for the group, so whoever feels compelled to take it. How do you consider investments or acquisitions in technologies that you don't have an existing sales force for that look really appealing? And how do you think through that? We meet with a lot of folks that we try to figure out where does it fit best with a strategic, and a lot of times it doesn't exist because you're creating a new category. And I look at a company like Edwards when they got into TAVR, and how do you go after that business? How do you create the TAVR model? How do you guys think about that, and any advice that you'd have for this group?
I guess I can start. Again, depending on how early stage the company is, right? It could be truly a technology development. We're basically using balance sheet dollars to fund R&D is the way I kind of think about it on the earlier stage deals. If it's a little bit later stage investment in terms of the company's life cycle, there probably is a commercial component to it, but it's probably something that we're not focused on at the core. So one example, I've got an investment in an obesity platform technology that is basically built around the Dexcom sensor platform. Is it something that Dexcom as the core is interested in? Yes, but we're focused on type 1 and type 2 diabetes now. This company is a little more progressive, looking at obesity. How do we use sensors, continuous glucose sensors, to help people manage their weight? we've not done any acquisitions in my 4 years to this point, but that would be one that you could envision where it could potentially become part of Dexcom, the mothership, because it's a platform technology built around our core sensor technology.
So I'll take a stab at that one. So Boston will only invest in companies if there is a division of Boston that looks at it and says, yes, in a few years when certain risks or losses are retired, we'd like to actually own that. And we only choose to buy things if there is some kind of fit with one of those divisions. It doesn't mean it has to be the same sales force, though. So we have an announced and pending transaction with Axonics. We do not have a sacral neuromodulation sales force. We will need one and value theirs. But we have a urology division. And so there are other points of commercial and R&D and G&A leverage that we can see around that business without necessarily needing to have a sales force, a drop in the bag for our sales force. But there does have to be some kind of fit with one of the operating units.
Yeah, we're very similar in that regard. You'd really need to believe it's a platform technology you can build around, because if you're talking about something like that, you're probably going on a real market development journey for a long period of time that requires a lot of investment, especially when you're talking about building out or augmenting an existing sales force is real investment over a long period of time. And so you'd really have to believe that technology is a platform you can build around over time. And I completely agree. Given the size and scale of our two respective businesses, the odds it wouldn't fit tangentially, at least in one of them, is pretty low, given we're focused on medtech. So I think I'm commenting similar to how you were thinking about it.
Just to make sure that I'm not misinterpreted, there's a 1 + 1 = 3 element to this in terms of synergies. Synergies are that when we put these businesses together, the collection can grow faster than either one on its own. So the opportunity for having these multiple products in one organization to drive growth among all the products, incremental revenue, and the ability to pour on resources and drive the acquired product to places it maybe wasn't going to go on its own.
We have a slightly different, and I know we're slightly different in how we operate. So we have an investment in a dental robotics platform, for instance. So it's really expanding access to dental care into your regular dentist offices. Clearly not in that space. We can help in a number of ways on the technical side, but frankly, where we're spending a lot of time is educating them on how to think about selling capital equipment in a different space, and how do you go to market, what lessons you can learn to create a new category that we've been through as well. So it's the 1 + 1 = 3, but for us, it's not necessarily through an acquisition. It's really lesson learned from creating a unique category and being successful at it, and just taking those lessons and applying it to new innovative platforms out there.
I'm going to ask each one of you guys this question because you can already see the diversity of the way these businesses run. And so I feel it's unfair just to ask one that they represent each of these groups, because clearly there are different lenses in how you guys operate. But if you think about the last few deals that each of you has done, can you talk about what the common themes are, or what the deal makers are that you've said, yes, we're going to pull the trigger, and the reason we're going to pull the trigger is because of this, this, and this? What is this, and this for each one of you? And maybe I'll start with Murielle.
So the last deal we did is Capstan, and so it is Valve was a robot in mitral, and so what made us really pull the trigger was it was actually it's a huge clinical need. Very few people can get access today to actually a valve, just because of the limitation around the population. So there was a huge clinical need that was unaddressed. It was a fantastic team. And this is an area, even though we're not in cardiac at all, where we feel we could help them on when they're thinking about automation and the robotic aspect of it. So it was a combination of unique big clinical need, fantastic team, and where we could really add strategic value.
And an adjacent market that was a new growth market for you guys too. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And I think much like Murielle's focused on robots, we're focused on sensors. How do we deploy sensors into adjacent markets, right? So obesity. We're spending a lot of our time when we look at potential transactions, it's, what are the comorbidities associated with diabetes? So, blood pressure issues, kidney failure, liver disease, like all the things that you would think about particularly in the type 2 diabetes world. How can we participate as a venture organization into those categories that maybe the core business isn't focused on today, but the core business could be focused on? And at the same time, how do we deploy sensors potentially into those ecosystems as we go forward?
So I'll give an answer for venture, and then I'll give an answer for M&A, free with purchase.
You're doing both.
So on the venture side, we don't press release most of our investments. So I'll just say, when I look back at recent deals that we have done, the key success factors are, as I already mentioned, that there's somebody within our business unit saying, I can sell the hell out of that thing if it actually works. But also there's a management team that we look at and say, these people will get it from point A to point B if it can be gotten there. And we look at their operating plan and we think it's credible that with the cash they're going to raise, they're really going to get to a meaningful milestone that de-risks the company and either allows for an exit or a next financing. Often there's not the right management team, or often there is not a credible business plan. So those things need to be there, as well as the great gizmo. And then on the M&A side, if I look at the last 3 deals that Boston announced, one thing that's pretty notable about them is they were all 3 very material revenue-generating businesses already, significant commercial businesses, 2 of them public companies. And I would say we do acquisitions of pre-commercial products, but most of our acquisition dollars and activity goes towards companies that have been further de-risked, have demonstrated that there's market demand, there's reimbursement, and there's already a revenue trajectory.
Yeah, I think I'll do an M&A one. I think for us, it needs to align to an operating unit strategy first, and is kind of core to achieving their revenue projections and objectives over some period of time, say 5 to 10 years. And one we recently announced that I'm most familiar with is a company called Cosmo in Italy, but they helped invent AI-assisted colonoscopy. And it's similar here, as it actually started as a distribution partnership over a 5-year period. And as the business scaled, it was de-risked. We generated more clinical evidence, generated more revenue, is when we finally signed what we're calling today essentially a perpetual license. And so it's that kind of commercial execution that we did that gave us the confidence that it was de-risked enough to then make a more meaningful investment. And a lot of times our acquisitions follow similar paths. Very rarely do we just wake up and do an intersect. These are types of companies and technologies that we've been thinking about and talking about internally for a number of years. And only when at certain value inflection points happen do we then ultimately decide to pull the trigger in a meaningful way, let's say.
Dave, you mentioned the concept of the perpetual license, and before we walked in here, you and I were talking about how much you liked that deal and the idea of doing things off of your own P&L. Can you or others comment on where you see that heading, and just how important P&L transactions, off P&L transaction using balance sheet dollars, how you think about that and where you think that is headed in the future?
Yeah, assuming there are no accountants in the room, Medtronic's as creative as we can be on types of financing. And so we will, anything we can do to partner with somebody to develop a technology and leverage their expertise, because we can't invent everything ourselves. We know that. We look for those types of relationships. This one worked. It's also a public company. They have about 50 people, technical talent that's highly focused in AI in Italy. And so, they're making that investment in operations and R&D while our business makes the investment on the commercial and marketing side. So it's a very kind of symbiotic relationship in that regard. That's why we were comfortable with such a long-term license in that example. And it also allows them to have the investment sort of on their balance sheet, if you will, or their income statement versus ours. And it's also the skill set they have that we really felt like we couldn't build in-house over a meaningfully short period of time. And so sometimes we always try and find those types of opportunities where it really is a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. We don't try and push everything into something like that, obviously. We do scaled acquisitions as well, but if there's a way to partner with a company and where both sides benefit and are happy with that outcome, we're more than willing to do it.
Michael, Steve, Muriel, any thoughts on that and using sort of off-balance sheet type activities? And
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've not been acquisitive to date. It's really from our lens, our investment lens is really much more focused on where are we not spending enough dollars internally on technology development, kind of advanced technology development. So how can we use balance sheet dollars to help there? Adam could have to correct me, but I don't think we have very little revenue for most of my portfolio companies, and I've got probably 10 of them right now. So,
yeah, more upstream. We go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, so we do a lot of development internally. We invest significantly in innovation internally within the confines of certain operating margin improvement targets that we're trying to hit, right? So there's some constraint there. But we also throw off a ton of cash. And we as a company have chosen to deploy approximately all of our EBITDA every year into supplementing our internal innovation with external BD. So we try to, we're not declaring dividends. If you look back over the last several years, net stock repurchase is essentially zero. We really try to leverage what's available in terms of cash on our balance sheet to drive additional innovation through our venture investments and our acquisitions.
And I'll say again, you get one person and one company way of behaving. So on our side, we have a very large percentage of R&D budget, internal R&D. There's a whole group focused on that. And we have our corporate development folks that are doing their own deals. And we're the off-balance sheet sort of view, very long-term on the ecosystem and where we see innovation going. Like Steve, we don't see a lot of revenues coming from our portfolio companies quite yet. There's some, but this is frankly more of a looking at innovation on the long term.
Thank you. We talked earlier about the deal makers and things that, with the common characteristics of the investments that you guys have made. Let's flip the coin over and talk about the deal breakers and the things that the folks in this room should absolutely under no circumstances ever do.
Don't run out of cash.
yeah, actually, I would echo that in a little bit different way. Is don't be focused on dilution, because I find founders who are hyper focused on dilution and make mistakes in not raising enough capital when they have the opportunity to raise capital to de-risk their story. I just take the capital and things. I mean, I've diluted the heck out of Dexcom over my close to 20 years there in the public markets, and taking the cash when you can get it is critically important.
Those two comments go hand in hand with build a great syndicate. If you want to not run out of cash, you're going to have to accept some dilution and make sure you've got a group of people around your boardroom table who are going to be there for the next round with the capacity to support your company.
I'll echo everybody with, again, a slightly different angle, which is that be sure you have enough to get to the next milestone and that gets to the syndicate, but be sure you hit your next value inflection point and have some buffer. A lot of companies have really good ideas, good team, and then they run into a snag, and if you don't have the right people at the table, you're not going to be there to see the next stage of the company. So make sure that gets to the dilution point.
Yeah, you'll have a plan, but then you got to remember there's these unknowns that are going to happen that you can't predict. And that's why it's so important that you have that extra buffer, because that unknown will eventually present itself, and you're going to need that's what you need the buffer for. Like what you put down on the slide or the plan, if you hit every milestone, that's great, but something's going to come up that you didn't think of. And that's when you need that extra cash to really, make it to that milestone. And then you need a syndicate, like you said, that can understand that and partner with you through whatever pivot or change or outcome that you need to drive for that period of time. So really, especially in this environment, that's top of my mind going into any of the venture investment committee meetings or board meetings.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the entrepreneurs in the room, it's not a straight path, and we all go through the ups and downs, and we learn painful lessons, and hopefully we have enough cash that we can survive it. it's maybe different when you've got multi-billion-dollar valuations, as everybody on the stage here has. So with that as context, what's the most painful lesson you guys have each learned in your roles over the last 10 years? None of us is perfect. We've all made bad investments. We've all had things where we've championed something and it hasn't gone right. And with that comes personal and professional pain. And if you're honest with yourself and you think about, okay, this is a real lesson that I've learned, if you're willing to share that with this group, I think there's probably a lot of wisdom there. And I'd love to hear your own lessons and things that generally come with painful choices we all make. Murielle?
I get the softball. Thank you. I would say to your point, for me, the biggest one, so it's not, we make mistakes, right? The worst is when you believe in an idea and you don't have the right syndicate to get to the next stage because there's been, an unknown that's coming. And no one is ready to fund to the next stage without inflection point. And then you go down in that downward cycle of recap, and the view of the companies is sort of changed in the marketplace. So I think from our standpoint, that's where we look at, indeed, the team, the clinical needs, the technology, the product market fit, but also we'll look at who else is around the table. We tend to go after platforms, so capital intensive, and having the right syndicate to help along the way is really helpful for that.
I think my biggest regret dovetails onto something you just said, which is I invested in a company from a technology perspective in spite of my better judgment on the CEO. And it's proven to be a colossal train wreck, to be honest. We're having trouble now raising that additional round. It's not really syndicate related. It's just I bet on the wrong horse. And so you said it before, making sure you're betting on the right management team that's going to help you get to that next round, that next stage, that ultimate acquisition probably, or IPO, is critically important. And I made one big mistake there.
It turns out you're betting on the jockey, not the horse. Yeah. So for me, in any we could be having any conversation right now. In any context, the answer to what's the most painful lesson is humility. I'm wrong most of the time. And you might be too. I don't know. I don't know what your circumstances are or what decisions you're facing. But I think for what that means within deal making at Boston Scientific is that we try to have a very open debate where we try to embrace a little bit of healthy conflict and pressure test each other and see if our ideas actually survive contact with each other. And then when we make investments, we try to stick, or acquisitions, we try to stick to things that we could do, a half dozen of these, and several of them will break and it'll still be okay. So we don't get so confident in what we're doing that we make the big bet that is gonna take us down. So that allows us to be very risk on in our approach, both to venture investing and acquiring. It also means that as we go through the process and even into the integration processes, we're trying to listen to other people, because whatever our deal model was, we know it's very wrong. And we need to remember that it's very wrong and try to be open to finding out exactly where it's wrong. And I'd encourage the founders and the management teams to take a similar approach and to have a plan, but have, as you said, cushion financially in the plan because it's wrong, and to be a bit measured in how you present it, to explore and acknowledge the risks, talk about what you're doing around the risks, because we're going to notice and we're going to ask questions about those things. And the pitch that is unalloyed confidence always makes me wonder.
We're a little short. The only thing I'll add is just, and I'll say this generally for Medtronic, is the businesses that we acquire where we just kind of dabble tend not to work. You lose the management focus, leadership focus you need to really execute well. Business development, by definition, is risk. If you're batting 600 or 700 you're world class in this type of activity. And so the whole organization needs to be committed to these types of investments or acquisitions that we make. And when we say, oh, this will just be this thing that's interesting, but it's not absolutely must have for the organization, for the business, they tend to not get the right, tender love and care it needs to be as successful as possible. And those are the ones, if I look back over the last 10 years, that I would probably think differently about doing.
So we're in our last 15 seconds here, and I'd just like to wrap up by acknowledging the esteemed group we have here. I mean, the fact that we were able to get this group together in one room to give us, in my mind, what was very sincere, thoughtful discussion to help address what a lot of the folks in this room are going through. On behalf of myself and everybody in here, thank you guys. Thanks for your time. This was great.